Hey there, anime Stark fans. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving into an epic crossover journey like no other. Get ready for What If Naruto Was Reborn in My Hero Academia, Part 1. This is just the beginning of an exciting new series, so hit that subscribe button and join us on this thrilling adventure through the worlds of two beloved anime universes. In this new world, some people were born with special and powerful abilities, while others were born with abilities that didn't have much use. In a world where 90% of the people were born with abilities that could be seen as Kekken Genkai in their world, it was clear that when these powers emerged, some used them to make life easier, including theft, intimidation, murder, and more. The world was spiraling downward, but something interesting happened. Some people used their abilities to stand up to those who were abusing their blessings. These individuals were called heroes. They were just good people doing the right thing. But good things don't last long. Someone had the brilliant idea that being a hero could be a profession. It wasn't a bad idea because there were also police officers, firefighters, soldiers, paramedics, people compensated for their efforts to make the world a better place. But every system becomes corrupted, and this one was no different. Everyone with powers wanted to be a hero, not for doing what was right, but for fame, money, recognition. A true hero never expected anything in return, they simply did what they believed was right. Everything was wrong. From a young age, children only wanted to be like the heroes they admired, only to change in the future and pursue their own goals. It was a hypocritical world, but in the midst of darkness, there was always a glimmer of light, All Might, a person who truly deserved the title of hero. It was strange that this man was seen as a symbol of peace, as peace is something created among others. All Might protected that peace with his own fists, something to be respected. He didn't extend an olive branch to reach peace with enemies, he crushed them to prevent them from disturbing the peace. I could respect the man for his actions. In addition to following a code he learned from the great Hokages of history, the will to protect one's own and others, no matter the cost, even if it meant sacrificing your body and soul, self-sacrifice, lying on the wire so that others could pass over you, being a shield for those in need. But still, even though I respected All Might, he made a mistake that should never be made, letting your enemies live, those who threatened your life and the lives of those you love. It's a grave error you'll regret for the rest of your life, yet I had to respect the ideals of others. That was one of his own rules instilled by his master. Uzumaki, stop thinking about nonsense. Let's go home, shouted a large man with a mountainous appearance, his big brown beard, and a huge beam he had just placed on the ground to wipe the sweat from his forehead. They were in a construction area where a building was being constructed. Come get your pay, kid, you did a good job, he said, leaving his towel on his shoulder as he walked toward the exit with his fellow workers. The Uzumaki, as mentioned by the worker, broke a large stone with a pickaxe. He calmly placed the pickaxe on his shoulder, revealing his spiked blonde hair as he removed his yellow helmet. The young boy appeared to be around 14 years old, slim and athletic, with blue eyes and cheek markings resembling those of a cat. He had bandages on his forehead that also covered his right eye and part of his cheek. Standing at 1.60 meters tall with a physique suited for hard work, he wore thick dark pants and a white shirt drenched in sweat. Silently and with a relaxed expression, he left the pickaxe in his helmet, sighing as he noticed that it was getting late. He walked alongside the other men he worked with, heading towards the exit where a woman was handing out paychecks to the workers. The woman appeared to be in her 20s and was the supervisor's lovely daughter. When it was his turn in line, the woman handed the check to the teenager. Good job, Naruto-kun. Hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you, Yumi-san, he replied with a faint smile and left the construction site. As minutes passed, he walked through the streets, noticing the stark differences between their worlds. The technology was advanced, perhaps too much for his liking, but the consequence of such technology was evident in people's dependency on it. Continuing on his way, he arrived at a store, entered, and picked up some drinks. Without anyone noticing, he slipped into the bathroom. Shortly afterward, an adult with dark hair emerged from the bathroom, paid for the beers, and left the store. In a puff of smoke, he transformed back into his previous appearance, stashing the drinks in his backpack. He headed down to the lower parts of the city, unfazed by the women offering services on the corners or the menacing individuals who crossed his path. It was well known in his home that he was not someone to be messed with. He had proven this when he broke and nearly tore the arm off a fool who tried to rob him. Arriving at some apartments, he went up to the top floor. He opened the door to a dim, small, and nearly empty home. I'm home, he said without waiting for a response and took the drinks from his backpack. Without hesitation, he began to drink. Approaching his window, he remained silent, gazing at the city. Using his one visible eye, he retrieved a locket from around his neck, opened it, and looked at a photograph of himself at 3 years old carrying a 1-year-old girl with fiery red hair. "Oh, how sad. You're going to make me cry." The Uzumaki ignored the female voice that emanated from within his head, closing the locket carefully. He continued to drink, now on his third can. "Do you plan to ignore me forever?" the voice inquired, adopting a more malicious and seductive tone. "Only until I die," was the young man's simple response. He gazed at the sky, lost among the stars. However, he was interrupted when everything around him changed, and he found himself in a dark place with seemingly endless walls and water up to his ankles. "Your words make my heart ache, more than you can imagine." A figure emerged from the shadows in the dark cave, a tall, beautiful woman standing at 1.85 meters. She had fiery red hair, pale skin, and bright red, slanted eyes resembling blood. Her markings were similar to the Uzumaki's. What stood out most was her state of undress, with a divine figure boasting large E-cup breasts defying gravity, a slender waist, and curvaceous hips leading down to long, shapely legs. She smiled with malice and approached, running her fingers through the young man's hair as he remained seated in the water. "You have no heart." The blonde's grave words were met with fury from the woman, who only smiled even more. "My little Naruto-chan. Remember your place." Her smile turned dark as fox-like ears formed above her head, and 9 gigantic tails sprouted behind her. She ran her hand across the boy's face, then seized him by the neck with force, making him look into her eyes. "You are just my plaything, a mere pest that I could crush if I wanted to. But what if I go after her?" She brought her face close to the adolescent's, causing their lips to almost touch, and they felt each other's warm breath. However, the redhead's smile faded when the teenager kicked her in the stomach, breaking free from her grasp and falling to the watery ground. The kitsune showed no physical reaction to the blow but was visibly affected by the rejection. "We have a deal. You won't touch her," shouted the Uzumaki, who was on his knees. When he tried to get up, the redhead kitsune stopped him with her foot. He was subdued and could only glare at the kitsune, who smirked mockingly. "I know. And part of the deal is that you are at my mercy. What I say must be obeyed without complaints or resistance," said the kitsune. Her tails moved slowly to surround both of them. Silently, she removed her foot from the teenager and knelt beside him. She whispered in his ear, "Because you are mine now, forever." In a dark, low voice. Then everything went dark for the Uzumaki as he closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself back in his apartment. Looking around, he saw that he had finished his drinks, and the alcohol had begun to take effect. He felt the heaviness in his body and sighed. It was the only way to numb the pain, with alcohol. He now understood why veterans drank so much. He got up from the window frame and threw himself on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Slowly, he closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. Another day, the same routine. The Uzumaki got out of bed with a mild hangover that disappeared within minutes, thanks to being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, or at least a part of it. The memories were still fresh in his mind. Flashback. Konoha was in flames. The most powerful tailed beast was wreaking havoc on the village. Shinobi were giving their lives for their village, either battling the tailed beast or rescuing as many people as they could. AHG. A 3-year-old blonde boy was carried by a 16-year-old teenager with silver hair in a pointed style. He had his left eye covered, and a mask concealed the lower part of his face. The young man had to make several jumps and slides to avoid falling when a burning building collapsed. "Kakashi-ne, where are we going?" yelled the boy on the shinobi's back. The shinobi was focused on how the 9-tails beast was restrained by a giant toad summoned by his master, only to disappear in a golden flash. "I have to take you to sensei," replied the determined teenager, who was giving his all to run as fast as he could. Ignoring the pleas for help from civilians caught in the crossfire between the beast and the shinobi, he kept running. But the boy on his back heard the pleas for help clearly. "Stop and help them." His cries were ignored by his older brother figure, who continued to run. Gritting his teeth, the blonde boy wanted to jump off the shinobi's back, but the teenager held him tighter. "We can't leave them. Stop. We can't save them all. You're more important," declared the shinobi with determination, and then fell silent. He looked at the Uzumaki with seriousness, who remained silent in the face of the strong shout. The young Hatake reached the Konoha forest just in time for a field of golden chains to appear. The two boys watched as the mighty 9-tails beast was bound by hundreds of golden chains emanating from a weary Kushina Uzumaki, who carried a bundle in her arms. "Mom!" The boy jumped off the shinobi's back and ran to his mother. Kneeling by her side, he saw the little newborn baby, just minutes old. Look. She's Natsumi. Your little sister, said the exhausted red-haired woman, showing the baby to her older son. Meanwhile, Yondaime was forming a long sequence of complex seals nearby. Well done, Kakashi, the grateful Namikaze patted his student's shoulder as he continued to breathe heavily. Getting more serious, he made an altar appear, and a spectral figure appeared behind him, only visible to him and the beast that struggled even harder in its restraints. Naruto. Catching his son's attention, he approached. Dad. The boy said slowly while holding his sister, who was taken by his father and placed on the altar. He was positioned in front of the altar, and his father, smiling calmly, patted his head affectionately. Minato, wait. Not them. You'll burden them with a load they should not bear. Kushina's cry attempted to reach her children, but all her concentration was focused on keeping the beast at bay. Moving would jeopardize everyone's lives. Naruto looked at his father in fear, but his father made him look at him again. Remember what we talked about, right? A shinobi, he began with a progressively weaker voice, gazing into his son's eyes. A shinobi must always protect his village, no matter the cost, he concluded the words of his father, who weakly smiled. In a gradual manner, Minato's body fell, but not before his soul was ripped out and devoured by the Shinigami. His badly mangled body fell forward, caught by the young blonde who could only embrace his father's lifeless form. Tears streamed endlessly from his eyes, and with a heart-wrenching cry, he mourned his father's sacrifice. Flashback ends. Furrowing his brow, the ninja got up and headed for the bathroom. Standing in front of the mirror, he removed the bandage from his forehead, revealing an old headband with the leaf symbol etched on it. However, it was now marked with a slash, indicating his status as a renegade ninja. He covered his right eye, deep in thought, then calmly took a shower. Minutes later, we see the ninja walking through the streets, wearing a white hoodie, dark pants, and blue shoes, with an old brown backpack on his back. Ignoring the people around him, he continued his journey. He had been in this city for over 6 months, and it was time to move on. It was crucial to keep moving. Being overly cautious was a bad habit, but that's the life of a ninja. He silently arrived at a train station, where a giant man was battling a provocatively dressed giant woman in the distance. Hasn't that guy been defeated before? A man in a suit nearby asked. Instead of avoiding the danger, people approached the scene as if it were a spectacle. To the ninja, it was just a performance, training, or at least it would be until something truly bad happened and it became a serious loss, not in terms of material possessions but something more severe. The blonde with bandages turned his attention back to the battle and then checked the time, deciding to wait for the train to continue on its route and leave the city. Now who's the bitch? The blonde heroine with long hair gave her opponent an uppercut, sending him falling on his back. She smiled arrogantly at the cameras capturing their showdown. As she was about to deliver the final blow, she was struck by a car thrown by the shark-nosed giant man. Angrily, she watched the villain run toward the subway station. Smirking, she waded into the crowd and grabbed a handful of people, taking 3 children and an adult man as hostages. Back off, or they'll become civilian smoothies. She raised her hands, showing her hostages, who were screaming for help. You coward. The heroine had to keep her distance to prevent the hostages from getting hurt, cursing herself for the grave mistake. Most people had left the subway station, except for one person who was observing the situation seriously. Rot in hell. Take one wrong step, and they all die, she threatened with her hands raised. Several newly arrived heroes kept their distance and waited for negotiation specialists. Meanwhile, Naruto slowly distanced himself from the chaos caused by the spectacle that could now turn into a tragedy. It wasn't his problem that this was happening. Please, help. I don't want to die. One of the children, a 6-year-old girl with blonde hair, cried out. She wriggled in the grip of the giant man, who had grabbed her with his free hand. Her cries caused a strong sound wave that seemed to come from her sobbing. Annoyed by the loud sound that hurt his ears, the giant man held her tightly, causing the onlookers to tense up. Brat. Silencing the girl, he opened his hand to take her in his fingers. I'll give you a real reason to scream. Slightly squeezing his fingers, the girl's scream echoed for miles. Everyone felt helpless, including the blonde ninja on the ground who stopped in his tracks to watch. Returning his gaze to the giant, he glanced at the hostages. To show that I'm not joking, I'll get rid of this brat. With a somber look, the teenager reached for his pocket and walked away, his expression shadowed. Stop. Mount Lady couldn't stand the girl's screams any longer and ran toward the giant. He lowered his hand, and blood splattered everywhere. Everything came to a halt as the giant's hand was cleanly cut off, causing a geyser of blood. Ah! Screaming in pain, he clutched the stump of his wound. His entire hand had been severed, yet there was nothing in the blonde teenager's hand. The girl, who had been screaming moments ago, was now on the ground with the other hostages, staring at a silhouette that had appeared before them. It was a teenager carrying a short sword with a dark hilt, its blade stained with blood. That's enough. The blonde teenager calmly turned to face the giant, who was focused on the person responsible for the loss of his hand. I won't let you harm them. With those words, he pointed his blood-stained sword at the villain, who roared with anger. You brat! Using his remaining hand, the giant tried to crush the ninja, but he didn't stay still. With a jump, he made his way up the giant's arm, running along it to reach the giant's face before he could react. His head was separated from his body, and it happened so fast that everyone was left in shock. A Class B villain had just been brutally killed, and the massive body made a dull thud as it fell, blood splattering everywhere. Everyone was appalled by the brutal scene that had just unfolded. A hero had arrived just as All Might was about to, and he had acted at the right moment. You'd better do this peacefully. Or. His eyes glowed menacingly, and the ground beneath him cracked as his muscles slightly grew. It'll be the hard way. With those words, he locked eyes with the teenager, who showed no fear, doubt, or any emotion about having killed a person and now standing before one of the world's strongest men. The blonde teenager slowly reached for his sword, taking a moment to assess the situation. His attention was divided, but he focused on the girl he had saved. She had run to her father and hugged him tightly, crying tears of joy. He then took his attention away from All Might and placed his sword in its scabbard on the ground, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. In a part of the city, underground, we see a concrete room where a person sat in the middle. This person was Naruto, sitting in a metal chair with heavy steel handcuffs covering his hands and wrists completely. With an empty look, he gazed ahead through a glass window. He knew there were people behind the glass. He had been sitting in this place for an hour and 30 minutes, sighing and lowering his head. You know, I'm surprised. The teenager didn't show surprise when, on the table in front of him, there was the Nine-Tails Kitsune. This time, the woman wore a dark kimono just for the sake of it. Someone like you coming to the rescue of a little girl. Is that heart of stone softening? She asked mockingly as she got off the table to look around. She could only exit her Jinchuriki in this spiritual form, visible only to her jailer. The blonde didn't even bother to answer. He simply kept his gaze on the floor, waiting for someone to tell him what would happen to him. Prison was the first thought that crossed his mind. As he snapped out of his thoughts, he felt the redhead reclining behind him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Does Uzumaki Naruto think he can find redemption? Smirking darkly, she rested her cheek against his jailer's. Do you think that saving kids and rescuing cats from trees will erase everything you've done? Oh, my dear Naruto-kun. Your hands are stained, and we both know that can't be washed away, no matter what we do. Humans believe all their actions can be forgiven or that they can find redemption by doing good deeds. Without letting go of Uzumaki, she tightened her grip. Nothing more basic than human sentimentality. They think everything will be okay in the end, when they know only a dark and sad fate awaits them, she said calmly, gradually tightening her hold on Uzumaki. Enough. Was the whisper of the shinobi who just wanted the nine-tailed beast to disappear. The beast vanished as if it had never existed, while at the same time, the room's door opened to reveal All Might. Leave? But I've just arrived, young Uzumaki. The imposing hero calmly took a chair and sat in front of the shinobi, who remained with his head bowed. The number one hero was dressed in a formal yellow suit and had a briefcase in hand. The sixth user of One for All opened the briefcase to take out some files and place them on the table. Looking up, Naruto glanced at the files on the table, then back at the older blonde. What will happen to me now? He asked calmly in the heavy atmosphere. In response, the hero sighed and opened one of the files. You have several charges against you. Not only are you guilty of first-degree murder, but also identity theft. You're not registered anywhere, not even a birth certificate with your name exists, he explained seriously, crossing his hands and looking at the teenager, who showed nothing more than a blank expression. And does that matter now? He asked calmly without losing his composure. No, that doesn't matter now. However, because you killed a person, you face at least 30 years to life in prison, which could be reduced since you're still a minor, the number one hero replied quickly. In the eyes of the authorities, I killed a man, but from my point of view, I killed a scoundrel who intended to harm a child, and I couldn't allow that, he sighed, looking at the table for a moment, then furrowed his brow and looked back at the hero. I don't care about the rules imposed in this society. I have my own code, and one of them is not letting children be killed, he said seriously, looking at the hero, who remained silent. Even if I don't agree with your methods, I have to thank you for what you did. You saved those people. Thanking the teenager, but with a more serious expression, he added, however, that doesn't undo what you did. That's why I'm afraid you have to face justice. He gathered all the files and put them in his briefcase, then looked at the shinobi again, who raised an eyebrow at his words. So, you conclude that I'll go without resistance? The blonde raised his hands to show the absence of handcuffs, which fell to the floor with a dull sound. I'm sorry, All Might, but I won't go to jail. Both of them stood up, eyeing each other with defiance, and a heavy atmosphere formed between the two blondes. I know, that's why I have a proposal for you. Opening his jacket, All Might pulled out a sheet of paper. I have an academy that's under attack by various dangerous villains. I have few options and few people I can trust. I need you to go there and pretend to be a first-year student along with other kids your age. He offered the paper to the blonde, who only gave it a glance. If I refuse, he responded defiantly. His response caused All Might to bulk up and his eyes to glow green. I'll take you to a place where you can't escape, were his grave words that made Uzumaki smile with mockery. Who would have thought that the symbol of peace had this side? He asked with humor as he took the paper from the hero's hands. It seems you care a lot about these kids if you're willing to trust someone like me. He stopped smiling and furrowed his brow. What makes you think I won't harm your students myself? What guarantees that I wasn't hired by a villain who wants your head? What makes you think I won't betray you in the future or just leave? Each question only made the atmosphere in the room heavier. I can't guarantee all of that. I know nothing about you, young Uzumaki, he sighed, pulling out his final card to convince the shinobi. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a newspaper clipping, opening it and handing it to Uzumaki, who took it and looked at it for a moment. I only know that you're a good person, he said, turning to go toward the door. Naruto, for a moment, looked at the picture of the girl he had saved, embracing her parents. The little girl cried tears of happiness, hugging her respective parents who also wept with joy for having their daughter with them. If I do this. All Might paused before leaving the room, turning around and standing in front of the serious blonde. But it will be on my terms. I need a weekly payment at the very least to cover my daily expenses, and they should return my belongings that were taken from me, and nothing more. Smiling, All Might nodded. That's how it will be, young Uzumaki. Izuku was excited. Just a few months ago, he had entered UA to fulfill his dream of becoming a hero. As the heir to One for All, he carried a great responsibility. Although he still couldn't fully control the power that had been passed down to him, he could focus it in his arms and legs for powerful attacks, or to a lesser extent with his fingers. But it came at a great cost, often leaving him with severe physical damage. Only a few days had passed since his battle with Kachan, his wounds had already healed, and he had made several friends in his class. Everything seemed to be going well. On another day, a 14-year-old boy with green hair and a UA school uniform stood in front of the big school. The teenager had an average height, a slim yet well-built physique, dark green eyes, and freckles on his cheeks. He smiled and walked forward. Move aside, Deku. He had to step aside as a blonde teenager with red eyes hurried past him. He was wearing the same uniform but was slightly taller and had slightly tanned skin. The teenager had an angry expression just at the sight of the green-haired boy who moved out of his way. Hi there, Kachan. The teenager greeted, only to receive a grumble from the boy who continued on his way. Midoriya sighed and continued to his class. Once inside the school, he was greeted by two people. Midoriya-san, it's 11:10 a.m. We only have about 5 minutes left before class starts, and we mustn't be late. The green-haired boy smiled uncomfortably at the exaggerated shouts from his friend Tenya Ida, a 15-year-old teenager who was tall and had a muscular physique, wearing the typical male school uniform. Hello, Deku-kun. We were waiting for you. The other person turned out to be a brown-haired teenager with a somewhat round face. She had a nice figure with C-cup breasts, a slim waist, and shapely hips. She wore the female school uniform, which was similar to the male one, except for the lower part, which was a moderately short gray skirt and low dark shoes with tall gray socks. Hi, guys, greeted his friends, and they headed to their respective classrooms. Upon arriving, they noticed they were the last ones to arrive, with the class filled with boys and girls of different appearances, some directly related to their quirks. However, something caught the attention of several. Hey, guys! A sharp-toothed, red-haired teenager greeted the newcomers, grabbing their attention. Look, it seems we'll have a new classmate, he said cheerfully, pointing to an empty seat in the last row. Is that allowed? Asked Kaminyari, a blonde teenager with a dark lightning bolt mark in his hair. He stood beside his red-haired friend, who simply shrugged. It's something unexpected, but nothing out of this world. The gazes of several people focused on a teenager with pale skin and dark hair tied in a high ponytail. The girl was the most voluptuous of the girls present, having a slim figure. Even though we are in the middle of the year's classes and a student is added, it is something impractical. It is the decision of the academy administration, so we should not hesitate of your choice, he explained professionally without batting an eyelid, all while sitting in an upright position behind his desk. What do you think the new student will be like? Will it be a girl or a boy? Asked a pink-skinned girl with hair to match and curious antennas on her forehead. The enthusiastic girl pondered the possibilities of a new classmate. It would be great if it were a girl, there are too few of us here. Her perspective was accepted by her classmates, who noticed the lack of balance in the absence of girls. However, others had different thoughts. Yes, let it be a girl, with big breasts and beautiful. That's all I can ask for, shouted a short guy with strange ball-shaped hair. He could only think of perverted things when a new female student arrived. This was not well received by the girls, who simply ignored him. Meanwhile, at the back of the class, there was a bicolor-haired girl named Shiori Todoroki. She was a tall young woman with straight, long hair reaching down to her lower back, equally divided between white on the right and red on the left. She had a burn scar over her left eye and heterochromia, where her left eye was light blue, and her right eye was gray. Her body was quite curvaceous, making her the second most developed among her classmates, with C+ cup breasts, a small waist, and wide hips. Undoubtedly, she was a remarkably beautiful young woman. The teenager sat quietly, paying no attention to what her classmates were saying, but she had to look up when she saw the classroom door open, allowing their teacher to enter. Quiet down. All the students quickly returned to their seats at their teacher's slow and tired-sounding words. He was a tall, unkempt man with long black hair, some of which fell over his forehead. He had a small beard and mustache, dark eyes reflecting only boredom. He wore a full-body black suit with bandages wrapped around his neck and yellow goggles hanging from his neck. As you may have noticed, there's an extra seat. You'll have a new classmate joining you for the next 4 years, he said this with a more serious expression while looking at the door. Enter. All the students looked with interest at the potential new classmate. Finally, they saw a tall, blonde-haired young man with a slim but well-built physique. He wore the male uniform, except for the missing tie and the unbuttoned shirt, giving him a casual appearance. Some noticed cat-like marks on his cheeks and white bandages covering his forehead and right eye, which added an air of mystery. Silently, the teenager walked up to stand in front of the class. With an analytical gaze, he looked at each of the students, who felt somewhat intimidated by the cold, penetrating look from his one visible eye. He then bowed slightly, saying, "Hello, I'm Uzumaki Naruto," introducing himself and waiting for the teacher to say something. "Is there anything else you'd like to share? Hobbies? Dreams?" The teacher asked, looking at the teenager, who remained stoic. "My hobbies are. Well, it doesn't matter to anyone, and as for my dreams, I don't have any in particular," he said and then walked to the only available seat in the class. The other students only watched him with uncertainty, he had only given his name. "Great, we have a Bakugo with an attitude as cold as Todoroki-san's," Denki whispered to Mina, who nodded in agreement. Physically, he had some similarities with the explosive boy in the class, but his reserved and cold attitude was more like the bicolor-haired girls. Everyone continued to chat among themselves about their new classmate, who sat down next to Shiori, the latter looking at him with curiosity. That's enough, all comments ceased at Aizawa's words as he took a piece of chalk to begin the lesson. Hours passed, and it was finally time for lunch. Changing the scene, we see all the students in their respective groups in the academy cafeteria. But at an isolated table, the new student from Class 1A, Uzumaki, was calmly eating a plate of rice with a glass of water and an apple. "Do you think he doesn't like us?" At a nearby table, several Class 1A students subtly observed their new classmate. A curious Hagakure stared at the newcomer who continued to eat. But she had to return to her seat when she felt the unexpected gaze of the blonde boy fix on her. "Strange. It's as if he can see me," she said thoughtfully to herself as she sneakily watched Uzumaki continue eating. "He's just a reserved person, that's all." Momo didn't pay as much attention to the new student as her classmates did. However, she raised an eyebrow when she saw Todoroki walk over to the table with her lunch tray and sit down with the blonde. Many of the students became even more curious when they saw the strongest girl in the class sitting with the newcomer. "That's interesting." Going to the table where Uzumaki and Todoroki were sitting, we see them having lunch in silence, ignoring each other. After a few seconds, the silence was finally broken by the ninja who offered a piece of apple to the teenager, who looked at him with uncertainty. "If we're going to sit at the same table, we should at least introduce ourselves properly," said the blonde with a simple smile, offering the piece of apple, which the girl accepted. I'm Shiori Todoroki, and as the sensei said, you're Naruto Uzumaki, she said calmly while taking a bite of the apple. The blonde nodded in response. Your last name doesn't sound familiar, and to be accepted mid-year, you must have someone influential vouching for you. So, who got you into the academy? Her words impressed the ninja. The girl wasn't just a pretty face, she was intelligent and perceptive, which he liked. All Might allowed me to enter this academy. His words left the girl in awe, and the fact that he said it so casually was almost ironic. Regaining her composure, she nodded. So, you want to be a hero? It was an obvious question since they were in an academy meant for that purpose, to train and help students develop their powers to become heroes, or at least that's what the teachers repeated constantly. No, was the simple response from the blonde, who got up from the table. A few seconds later, the bell rang again, prompting all the students to return to their respective classrooms. However, Shiori remained seated for a moment, curiously watching the newcomer as he disappeared into the hallways. Back in the classroom, they found that their teacher was absent. After a while, someone came in. The eyes of almost all the students lit up when the number one hero entered. All Might. Mina Ashido's cry was followed by her classmates, but they stopped when the older blonde raised his hand to silence them. Very well, young ones, this time we will have an exercise similar to the one we had before. It will consist of one-on-one combat of your choice. We only hope not to have any casualties like last time. Several gazes focused on Midoriya, who smiled uncomfortably. It will be a good opportunity to see what each of you is capable of in a real fight. I know it's your first year, but this is necessary. He gave a brief glance to the ninja and then headed for the door, hoping not to regret this impulsive decision, as his colleagues had expressed their opinions. Flashback. In the UA principal's office, a private meeting was taking place between the heads of the institution and the most important heroes. The principal, a ferret or rat-like creature dressed in a formal suit, sipped tea while an image of their new student was displayed on a screen on his desk. In front of the desk were All Might, Cementos, Number 13, Midnight, Eraserhead, and Present Mike. Everyone's attention was on the image of their new student, who was shown cutting off a giant villain's head. I don't trust him, Aizawa didn't hesitate to express his distrust of the blonde shown on the screen. This is a decision we doubt is the right one, Toshinori. The school director stopped sipping tea and looked seriously at his old friend. With his paws joined, he remained still, watching a video of their new student decapitating the villain. Covering up everything related to that incident cost us too much. The police agreed to change the facts to absolve the boy of his crimes, but they expect results. Otherwise, they'll have to reinstate the charges against him. The rodent's explanation made the number one hero appear even more somber. I know my decision is hasty, but something tells me I can trust him, the tall blonde said calmly, reaching out to turn off the screen, which showed Uzumaki holding a bloodied sword. His words made his present colleagues furrow their brows. We're only trusting that boy because of your intuition. I'm sorry, Mr. Toshinori, but we're risking many lives, not just those of the students. What if his objective is something else? Stepping forward, the only woman in the room spoke. You have many enemies, and if some of them sent that boy to act like a sheep that entered the flock with the other students, only to reveal himself as a wolf when the situation requires, to fulfill his objective, which could be killing you. Midnight's words made many ponder her seriousness. The fact that her friend had been present when the boy decapitated the villain had a strong impact on Mount Lady, who was deeply affected by how a child had beheaded the villain she should have stopped. She's right, Cementos spoke up, showing uncertainty about the decision that was being made. However, I have faith in you, All Might. If you believe that this boy can be of help if things get tough, so be it. Opinions were divided, but the decision had already been made. Very well, but I want to see what the boy is capable of. It wouldn't be wise to put him against a professional hero. We have to be smarter about this. Let's have an exercise, the academy director said thoughtfully, getting up to walk over to the window. Where the students from Class 1A have to face each other. All Might nodded in agreement with the director's suggestion. But, sir, these kinds of procedures are usually carried out at the end of the second year. They're not ready for one-on-one fights yet, Present Mike expressed his concern, speaking for the first time during the meeting. I know, but in these times, we can't afford to wait, the animal in a suit stated. After these words, the meeting ended. End of flashback. All Might patiently waited at one of the training stations. Several of the students were already in their hero costumes, but he raised an eyebrow when he noticed that the teenage Uzumaki was only wearing a white hoodie, dark pants with bandages wrapped around his ankles, dark sandals on his feet, and a tanto or short sword attached to his back with a brown leather shoulder strap on his left side. Young Uzumaki, didn't you order a costume that suits your needs? The tall blonde inquired, curious. The ninja's response was a mocking smile as he glanced at the costumes worn by his classmates. If you rely on a costume to control your abilities, there's a serious problem. You should know that the costume is just an unnecessary accessory, in my opinion. And you all look like idiots. His words irritated the present teenagers, but they were completely ignored by the ninja as he walked away from the group to survey the combat area. I thought Bakugo was an arrogant idiot, Kirishima whispered to Mina, who nodded in agreement. However, they both tensed up when the bandaged blonde's gaze focused on them. Arrogant? The blonde asked aloud, smiling slightly, and shaking his head. He then looked at the students. I'm a person confident in my abilities, and I can say that I could defeat each and every one of you. His words unleashed the obvious. Oh, you thinking you're better than these losers doesn't bother me, but you're not better than me, Katsuki declared, causing small explosions with his hands as he approached the blue-eyed blonde in a confrontational manner. The gazes of both blondes clashed, and it seemed that an inevitable showdown was about to happen. That's enough. All Might stood between the two blondes to prevent an imminent fight. Young Uzumaki, I'll ask you to refrain from making comments of that kind, it's unnecessary. He spoke with seriousness but only received an impassive look from the ninja, who let out a sigh. You're right, we should talk seriously. I'll fight against the entire class. Raising his hands, he started to remove the bandages from his forehead to reveal a metal headband with a symbol of a leaf being crossed by a horizontal line. If you win, I'll apologize for everything I've said, and I'll leave this academy. Many of their gazes ignited at this challenge, while others showed doubt. But if I win, the bandages fell to reveal his right eye, leaving everyone shocked by a large scar that ran from his forehead to his cheek. Several felt uncomfortable seeing the gruesome scar caused by what seemed to be a red-hot iron, which had left the scar severely burnt. You'll admit that you're not worthy of being called heroes. The ninja's right eye was blood red with 3 commas revolving around the pupil. What the hell is that? Kirishima couldn't help but ask, feeling strange at the sight of that strange eye analyzing each and every one of them. Involuntarily, the red-haired boy caused his arms to harden. Toru Hagakure, for the first time since activating her quirk at the age of 3, felt analyzed and observed. Swallowing nervously, she shifted uncomfortably. Her reaction wasn't the only one. Everyone felt strange and uncomfortable in the presence of that unusual eye. As for the number 1 hero, he only furrowed his brow. This was new. He knew that people born with quirks could have side effects on their physical appearance, but nothing like this. Seeing that scar with that unique eye only indicated that the eye wasn't his, it belonged to someone else. But had his new student really torn out his own eye to implant a new one, which might have belonged to someone else? He needed more information, but unfortunately, he couldn't pass up the opportunity for a demonstration that could take place now. Your request will be granted, young Uzumaki. All the students, except for Uzumaki, looked at the number 1 hero with surprise as he took on a more serious expression. But if things get out of control, I won't hesitate to stop the fight. Is that clear? He asked with a deep voice, looking directly at the ninja, who simply nodded. So, you little rascals. With his differently colored eyes gleaming with amusement, the blonde looked at his opponents who had already activated their quirks. Ready to get a taste of the real world? A heavy silence filled the training area where a battle was about to take place. It was Class 1A versus the newcomer class, positioned on opposite sides. All Might kept a safe distance to watch the fight and intervene if necessary. Many of the students were waiting for the right moment to attack, but they were unsure because they were inexperienced in combat. Some of them had never been in a real battle, while others had some experience. Die! Bakugo, fueled by the explosions from his hands, shot towards his opponent with incredible speed. Using his right hand, the explosive blonde delivered a punch that caused an explosion, forcing others to take cover. Amidst the dust and debris, Katsuki rose among the rocks he had created with his explosion. Don't hide, you coward! He angrily searched for his elusive opponent. You're very noisy. Katsuki froze when he felt the shinobi's fist against his right cheek. This shocked the explosive blonde, who hadn't even seen his opponent move. The shinobi turned his back to him and spoke calmly, shouting like a maniac while attacking isn't smart. He moved his fist away and crossed his arms. You're a waste of time. After saying that, he had to duck to avoid another explosion from the furious explosive teenager, who was seething with anger at the taunts. Shut up. He was about to unleash a massive explosion when he realized that his right arm was held in a strong grip by the blonde shinobi, who looked serious. Predictable. Before his opponent could react, the shinobi tightened his grip on the explosive teenager's arm and threw him to the ground. He then lifted his foot and stepped on Bakugo's right shoulder, causing a painful, bone-crunching sound. "I'm not done yet." He picked up Bakugo and threw him in front of the paralyzed students, who were horrified by the brutality. "Katsuki. Are you okay?" Kirishima was the first to reach his friend, but Katsuki's response was a pain groan as he tried to stand but fell again due to the excruciating pain in his right arm. "This isn't a fair fight." His shout stopped when the strange-eyed blonde appeared in a burst of speed, completely serious. Silence. Without mercy, he kicked the masked redhead, who had activated his quirk. Despite his resilience, Shoji was sent flying backward, knocking down Kaminyari in the process. "You're just a bunch of brats." He turned and faced the boy with a tail, who tried to attack him from above. But it was no challenge for the shinobi, who grabbed him by the left leg and slammed him into Koji Koda, the boy who could communicate with animals. They both crashed hard into the wall of the building, knocking them out. Naruto was about to attack Mineta, who couldn't stop trembling, but Shoji, the masked student with 6 arms, intervened and launched a flurry of punches. With his Sharingan faintly glowing, Uzumaki dodged every blow. "Stay still." The enraged giant made more arms appear, and they all went after the shinobi, who managed to evade every single strike. "This is incredible." Momo and her classmates watched in disbelief as the 8-armed giant attacked with blurry strikes they couldn't see. However, everything came to a halt when Koji froze, feeling the shinobi bend down and deliver a powerful blow to his stomach, leaving him breathless. A profound silence filled the area as the masked giant remained standing. Naruto took a step back, removing his fist from the student's stomach, and Koji fell heavily to the ground. Everyone had to be on high alert as the blonde with different colored eyes prepared to attack again. However, Naruto was forced to stop when powerful sound waves hit him. His attention shifted to Kyoka, who used her costume to direct as much noise as possible at him. "Don't just stand there, someone attack," she shouted with all her might. Her words snapped her comrades back to reality, and Shiori was the first to strike. With a powerful stomp, she caused a layer of ice to cover the right side of her body. Growling, she summoned a massive ice wall, about 20 meters tall, which hurtled toward the shinobi, burying him in a mound of ice. "It's done." Breathing heavily, the girl had to drop to her knees. It wasn't easy to summon that much ice at once, but it was necessary to stop that guy. His strength, his speed, he was a monster. All the students breathed a sigh of relief when they saw the shinobi trapped within the ice mound. "You did well." "I didn't expect that," they heard his voice again. Among the students still standing in the battle, Naruto was behind them all, his arms crossed. "Ah! Get away!" Panicking, Mineta started plucking dozens of sticky spheres from his head and threw them at the shinobi. He watched curiously as the spheres were hurled at him, but he didn't let any of them touch him. He rushed toward the small, bleeding student who was shouting for help. "Help!" Trying to escape, Mineta was caught by his cape. The shinobi lifted him, looking at him with annoyance. "Let him go." In slow motion and using all the power he had, Ida charged at the shinobi. Blue flames erupted from his ankles, and he delivered a horizontal kick. However, he looked incredulous when, instead of hitting Uzumaki, he struck Aoyama, the French boy, who fell to the ground, incapacitated by the blow. "Slow." Ida's eyes widened in disbelief when he heard the shinobi's voice from behind. He was holding a paralyzed Mineta by his head and tossed him into the air, only to kick him and send him flying into the speedster. Ida had lowered his guard while catching the small classmate, and he received a knee to the face, which sent him tumbling back. Uzumaki unsheathed his sword and struck Toru, who tried to attack him from behind. The invisible girl cried out as she was hit in the head and fell from a leg sweep by Uzumaki, who grabbed one of her legs. "Ah!" She was thrown and collided with Kyoka, who couldn't avoid getting hit, causing both of them to fall. Momo created a steel rod from her right arm and swiftly moved towards the blonde. She displayed some basic knowledge of using a bow staff. She attempted to strike the shinobi, but he caught the object with his hands. The black-haired girl hesitated and tried to step back, but the shinobi's hand covered her face, forcefully slamming her to the ground. Seeing the girl knocked down, Uzumaki raised the steel rod to continue his attack. However, a long tongue wrapped around his wrist, and he curiously observed the frog girl trying to pull him in with her tongue. Smirking with mockery, the shinobi twirled the girl by her tongue, lifting her a few meters off the ground before crashing her against the floor alongside her other teammates. The shinobi raised an eyebrow when a peculiar shadow-like figure attacked him from the ground. Leaping back to avoid the shadow, he charged Tokoyami and delivered a horizontal kick. After hitting his opponent, He noticed the spectral figure that was about to attack vanished as the bird-headed student fell unconscious from the kick. "Hey, leave them alone." Rikido Sato took a sugar packet from his costume and consumed it. The blonde Uzumaki watched curiously as the teenager's muscle mass increased, and with respectable speed, Sato charged towards him. The yellow-clad teen sprinted full tilt, but the shinobi remained impassive, jumping low to deliver a swift kick that Sato couldn't land. The impact hit the ground, causing it to crack. With an impassive expression, Uzumaki stepped back to avoid Sato's rapid punches. However, after a few seconds, he noticed Sato's labored breathing, and his speed plummeted instantly. As the student attempted to obtain more sugar, he received a kick to his left arm, sending him flying and crashing harshly into some rocks in the training area. "Take this." Naruto had to tear off his white sweatshirt when it was hit by corrosive acid. Nearby, a furious Mina threw acid multiple times, hoping to hit the guy who had hurt her friends. However, when she ran towards him, she was knocked down by a punch to her stomach, causing her to lose her breath and fall to her knees. "You coward." Uzumaki watched with boredom as a considerable amount of tape wrapped around him. Facing him, Sero had his arms aimed at the shinobi. "You don't even hold back against the girls. What kind of a guy are you?" he asked angrily, receiving only a mocking smile from the blonde who shook his head. "Do you think the people you'll fight in the future will be knights who won't harm women just because they're women? Welcome to the real world, fool." With a burst of strength, Uzumaki broke free of his restraints. Grabbing a piece of the tape, he pulled Sero toward him and seized him by the neck, squeezing tightly. The boy squirmed until he was finally released, then Uzumaki kicked him and sent him crashing into the concrete wall. Sighing, the shinobi noticed only 3 people left standing: Shiori, Midoriya, and little Uraka. Sheathing his sword once more, he charged the last 3 remaining students. Reaching Todoroki, he grabbed her by the uniform and tossed her into the air. She managed to attempt a landing on her feet but was struck behind the neck by Uzumaki's hand, leaving her unconscious. And for the grand finale. Smiling ominously, the shinobi charged towards Ochako, who was paralyzed. Just a few meters away from reaching her, she was whisked away by the green-haired teenager, who scooped her into his arms and ran to put some distance between them and the shinobi, who furrowed his brow at this action. Die. What Uzumaki didn't see coming was Bakugo, who had his left arm extended with a grenade on his wrist, its light glowing fiercely. With his teeth, the blonde disarmed his costume's grenade and a massive explosion struck Uzumaki head-on. He could only shield himself. With his right arm hanging uselessly, Katsuki fell to his knees, breathing heavily. He smiled as he observed the massive crater left by his last attack. However, that smile disappeared when, at the end of the destruction trench, Uzumaki stood, his arm slightly injured by the unexpected explosion. Smirking to himself, the shinobi separated his arms and charged towards the exhausted Bakugo, struggling to stand. Reaching him, he grabbed the top of Bakugo's head and slammed him into the ground, knocking him out. Sighing, he left the boy's body and got back on his feet. Now only 2 remained. Smash! The shinobi had to turn and deflect a punch from the green-haired teen who surprisingly appeared behind him to attack. He deflected the boy's arm, which now glowed orange with red markings, causing it to hit a nearby brick wall. To his astonishment, the entire building shook, and a 30-square-meter concrete wall vanished, leaving behind nothing but destruction. Still surprised, the blonde noticed the boy lying on the ground. His legs and the arm he used to strike were severely damaged. Setting his surprise aside, he saw that the boy possessed some kind of enhancer that reminded him of internal gates. Interesting, he muttered to himself while walking towards the last person standing in the battle. Ochako was frightened, all her friends had been defeated, and now he was coming for her. Trembling uncontrollably, she took a clumsy fighting stance that offered no defense. Seeing that he was just a few steps away from her, she closed her eyes. Huh? Perplexed, she felt a gentle tap on her forehead. Opening her eyes, she saw the blonde had lightly tapped her forehead with the tips of his fingers. Without saying a word, he moved away from her and walked toward the exit. Bringing his right hand to his forehead, he lowered the right side of his headband to cover his Sharingan. He sighed and reached a spot next to All Might, who hadn't moved since the battle began. Get the kids attended to. I want to collect my bet in a few hours, the shinobi said without a single scratch on him, and he left the training area. With a sweat drop forming on his forehead, All Might watched the entire Class 1A defeated. He placed his hand on his ear and activated his communicator. He needed to inform the infirmary and some medical personnel. Several hours later, in the auditorium, we see Class 1A gathered. They all had some injuries, with some more severe than others. For instance, Bakugo's right arm was bandaged, and Midoriya's right arm was also bandaged. It was evident he had trouble even standing, indicating that his legs weren't fully healed. They were all upset and dejected after the beating they'd received from the newcomer, who stood only a few steps away from them with his arms crossed. "So, is that all you've got?" "I'm disappointed." The Uzumaki's words only fueled the students' anger further. "It's not fair, you're too strong." The invisible girl shouted in anger at the blonde. "And you're crazy to fight like that. It was just supposed to be a practice." The girl with bandages around her head exclaimed. "She's right, you're a brute. Someone could have been seriously hurt," said Mina Ashido, who, like the others, could only feel anger toward the blonde who remained entirely unfazed by the students' outcries. "So it's my fault?" the shinobi asked sarcastically, maintaining an impassive expression. "You're just a bunch of kids playing at being heroes. You lack a lot of discipline and training to use those powers properly. Right now, you're nothing more than insects I could crush if I wanted." Each word made the students feel more and more belittled, while some just felt anger. "Shut up, you damn trash." Impulsively and blinded by anger, Katsuki charged at the Uzumaki. But everything ended in less than a blink, and the students watched in disbelief as the explosive teen was on the ground, under the shinobi's grip, who placed a short sword behind the explosive teen's head. "Stop." When Deku was about to try and save his friend, he was halted by a kunai that dropped at his feet. The tension in the place was serious. Some panicking students looked at All Might, who was nearby, watching everything with seriousness. "Is it Bakugo, right?" Naruto asked, gripping the explosive boy tightly, who was giving him a murderous look. "Do you think you're the best of all? You attacked first without a plan in mind, trying to blow me up with an explosion that would have hit your companion too. If it wasn't for Midoriya, she could have been hurt or even killed. Do you have so much anger and rage that you can't see your actions?" He looked up at the other teenagers in front of him. "Do you think this is just a game? The fight we had showed me one thing." "And what is it?" Shiori asked in a cold tone, along with her classmates, feeling intimidated by that bright red eye and the shinobi's attitude. "That you're not ready for reality. Do you think the people you'll face in the future will care whether you're girls or boys? They'll grab you by the neck and tear your heads off. That's the best that can happen to you. This is a dark world where you have to make choices." Pressing the sword against Bakugo's head made several tense. Uzumaki's gaze at Midoriya made him stiff. "Midoriya, pick up the kunai from the ground." Reluctantly, the green-haired boy followed the request and picked up the knife. "Now, kill Uraka, or I'll kill Bakugo." A deathly silence filled the place. But before anyone could do or say anything, All Might appeared and grabbed the shinobi's arm, looking at him with annoyance. "That's enough." With a deep voice, the number one hero separated Uzumaki from the explosive teenager, who was slowly getting up. The shinobi simply sheathed his sword and looked at the teenagers who gazed at him in fear. He had just given them a choice to kill a friend or an innocent girl. "You're a monster," Ochako whispered, and her words were heard by all. The brown-haired girl stepped back when she caught the gaze of the blonde boy, who was lazily wrapping bandages around his forehead and right eye. "I'm a survivor. If you're willing to continue this hero nonsense, you must know you'll face decisions like these all the time. If you don't have the courage to make the right decision, someone else will, and you won't like what happens." Without another word, the shinobi slowly left the place, while the others remained where they were. "Class is dismissed for today. You can go now." Upon the hero's words, all the teenagers left the place. All Might sighed and rubbed his forehead tiredly. There were cameras all over the training room where the fight took place. The abilities that this kid had were astonishing, but his ideals, they weren't what a young boy should have. Hours later, in the lower parts of the city, in the apartments where the shinobi lived, he was currently sitting on his bed with only the lower part of his clothing on. The teenager had removed his headband to look at it for a moment. "Are you going to cry, or are you just thinking about the beating you gave those brats?" The kitsune's comment only made the shinobi sigh and fall back on his bed. "They're just kids. They'd better enjoy this stage. All I did was give them a small taste of what awaits them," the shinobi spoke aloud, not bothering to speak in his subconscious. "You're a sentimental. I'm going to sleep." Saying that, the kitsune cut the mental connection, leaving the blonde alone, sitting on his bed. The Uzumaki just stared into nothingness as he took his sword and took a moment to look at it. How much time had passed since he arrived here? Closing his eyes, he let his sword fall onto the bed beside him and, giving in, decided to go to sleep. He had just broken one of his most important rules, and now he was paying the price. On the outskirts of the Land of Water, near the Village of the Rain, the dark sky was momentarily lit up by lightning produced by the storm, which made the sky even darker. Amid the dark landscape, we could see several fallen trees and large craters. Nearby, we see a blonde-haired teenager who was badly injured. His left arm was hanging with severe fractures. He was wearing only dark pants, revealing his torso covered in dark bruises. One of his eyes was closed, leaving only his Sharingan eye shining intensely. The teenager breathed heavily, using his right hand to retrieve a scroll from his back pocket. Opening the scroll with his teeth, he let it fall, allowing it to get wet in the pouring rain. Exhausted, the teenager used his blood-stained fingers to write on the scroll, and after a few seconds, he closed it. Forming hand seals with his one available arm, he made a crow appear in a puff of smoke. "Take it away. Now." Following the command, the crow took the scroll in its talons and flew away. As the blonde watched, his summon disappeared into the rain. He then closed his eyes and fell against the tree he was leaning on. Tired? The teenager instantly jumped and avoided an invisible force that destroyed the tree and left a crater in the area. Landing at a distance, he saw a dark figure with a dark cloak adorned with red clouds emerging from the trees. It was an adult man with orange hair and piercings on his face, small dark steel cylinders. His eyes were silver with a pattern of 6 rings surrounding the pupil. "If there's a god, it wouldn't be you, Pain." Exhausted, the blonde fell to his knees and looked at his attacker, who showed nothing but indifference. "So now you're going to kill me, huh? After all these years of friendship and service. What a lousy friend you are." The shinobi's mocking words made the Rinnegan user raise his right hand and pointed at him. The teenager gulped and got into a defensive position. "Your sense of humor always surprised me. It was a pleasure, Uzumaki Naruto." With a gleam in his eyes, he created an invisible force out of nowhere, erasing more than 400 meters of forest along with the blonde shinobi, who was sent flying by the gravitational pull. Lowering his hand, the orange-haired man turned and walked slowly back to the village of the rain. In the distance, among the fallen trees, we see an immobile Naruto beneath the logs that had crushed him. "How weak." A feminine voice made the Uzumaki open his eyes and look at the female silhouette of the Nine-Tails sitting on the log above him. "Although you did well." "Nah, who am I kidding? They really messed you up. Come on, get up. I don't want to have to reform in 120 years because of your death." With those words, the redhead raised a finger on her right hand and touched the blonde's chest, slowly enveloping him in a bubbly layer of tainted red chakra, rapidly healing his wounds. "AHG," the teenager grunted as he lifted the log that had been crushing him. Now free, he struggled to stand, all the while being followed by the smiling redhead who enjoyed seeing her jailer in such a pitiful state. Although she had healed his injuries, she had done so to prevent his death. The fractures and other damage continued to make each step a torment. "I expected at least a thank you, but seeing you in this state is enough." The red-haired, red-eyed fox watched as her Jinchuriki continued to walk in a random direction. "I don't understand it. Why do you get up? You have nothing. You don't have a home, you don't have friends, your family turned their back on you, and your own village is after your head. You're alone." Each word made the Uzumaki's gaze grow darker. Walking briskly, the Nine-Tails stood in front of the Uzumaki. "Just break the seal, and I assure you, you'll die quickly and be reunited with your loved ones, your friends, your father, and your sensei." Before she could continue speaking, she was pierced as if by a ghost, and the shinobi continued walking. "Keep dreaming." Weary, the blonde kept walking under the rain. Looking around, he saw that he was now outside the limits of the village of the rain. Reaching a green meadow, he noticed that the rain was gradually stopping. With a sigh, he continued walking, only to fall into a sinkhole that opened beneath his feet. Falling abruptly, he found himself in a cave underground. Looking up, he saw the hole from which he had fallen and furrowed his brow. He got up and saw something strange in front of him, 2 vertical rock pillars parallel to each other, with strange inscriptions in a dialect he couldn't comprehend. "This." The ethereal form of the Kyubi appeared alongside his Jinchuriki and instantly recognized the inscriptions on the rock. Approaching, he ran his hands along the rock pillar. "Old man." Frowning, he saw the distinctive symbol of the Rinnegan carved into the stone. "You must leave here. This is not something that humans should see." Looking at his jailer, he saw that he only glanced at the large pillars. Raising an eyebrow at what the redhead said, the shinobi touched the pillar and was surprised when grooves began to form. Before he knew it, the 2 pillars formed a bright door that illuminated the entire cave. Before he could step back, the blonde was blinded by the light and felt a pull that led him forward. Opening his eyes, Naruto saw that he was in his apartment bed. Growling, he rubbed his forehead in frustration. Getting up, he looked at the room's window, which showed the sun slowly rising from the horizon, marking the beginning of a new day. With a sigh, the Uzumaki went to prepare for his day at UA. Another day was beginning. Hello everyone, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my channel, Snuggy Dude. On this channel, I regularly upload high-quality fanfiction stories centered around the character Deku from My Hero Academia. You can find the link to my channel in the description below. I appreciate your support and hope you enjoy the content. Thank you for considering subscribing. Weeks had gone by, and the rumor that a single boy had defeated Class 1A spread like wildfire. This, of course, amused students from other departments and courses, learning that the top candidates of this generation had been beaten by one person. Many might have thought that by defeating an entire class, Naruto would gain respect and a presence in UA. However, his serious and intimidating attitude only earned him the title of the troublemaker, someone who was only in the academy for no apparent reason, with no future as a hero. Some even labeled him a potential future villain to be confronted. Amidst all these events and rumors, a significant enmity developed between Class 1A and Uzumaki. Some students ignored him and focused on their studies or socialized among themselves, leaving the shinobi alone. Yet, there were others who wanted to bridge the gap. Deku stood with his lunch tray in hand, looking at the bustling cafeteria where all the students were gathered. The green-haired boy had fully recovered from his injuries, thanks to the nurse's quirk, which allowed her to heal wounds. He considered approaching the solitary Naruto and trying to strike up a conversation. However, his shoulder was touched by a serious Ida, who shook his head, with Uraka standing behind him, echoing his concerns. "I don't think it's a good idea, Deku-kun. He doesn't seem like the kind of person who enjoys company," said the brunette. Izuku hesitated but ultimately chose to join his friends and sit with them, along with most of his class. "I'm surprised he still comes here," commented Kaminyari, who sat at the same table, eating. His comment was heard by his classmates, who only glanced briefly at Uzumaki. "My arms still ache from the beating he gave us," said Kirishima, who rubbed his right arm with a pained expression, the scars from their encounter a blow to their pride. "Why do you think he's like that?" asked a curious Toru, who looked directly at the shinobi without paying attention to others avoiding eye contact with him. "Because he's crazy and a psychopath." Mineta didn't hold back his thoughts and shouted with fear, earning him a kick to the back from the shinobi, leaving him in pain for days. "Isn't this supposed to be a hero academy?" he asked, frustrated, crossing his arms. "He has as much right as anyone to be here," said Momo, who looked at the perverted little guy with annoyance. UA was founded on the belief that anyone can be a hero. She furrowed her brow and took a deep breath. "We don't know Uzumaki-san's personal life, but he must have his reasons for his behavior. Maybe he had a tough life, we don't know. But that's going to change." To the surprise of several at the table, the girl stood up with a determined look in her eyes, took her lunch tray, and said, "As class president, I must set an example and not leave a fellow student in isolation." Before anyone could stop her, she had gone to the shinobi's table. "Wait." Kyoka tried to stop her, but the girl had already left. Sighing, she sat back in her seat. "She's taking that position way too seriously. Why did we even have a re-election?" the slender girl asked, giving herself a forehead slap. "Because Ida was embarrassed by the beating and resigned, saying he wasn't ready for the role," Ochako answered without thinking, causing Ida to look at the brunette, who continued eating in silence. "I remember that time in the Great Shinobi War when I was attacked by the Kaguya clan. I used their bones as toothpicks and only let a few escape to spread the warning that the Nine-Tails Kitsune should not be disturbed." The red-haired Nine-Tails was sitting at the table where Uzumaki was having his lunch. She had her back turned to her captor, who was casually eating some fish and rice. "What a touching and heartwarming story," the blonde teenager thought sarcastically, not bothering to look at the fox who gazed around with boredom. "You know, even though this place is annoying, it's nice to feel the emotions of fear, jealousy, and anger from these brats." The Bijuu's comment made Uzumaki raise an eyebrow. She was smiling even more, gesturing toward the other students around. "They all either fear or hate you. It doesn't surprise me. Humans are just despicable beings who fear those who are superior. I'm not superior to anyone. I'm just like any of them," Uzumaki quickly corrected, pausing for a moment. "As you say, I'm just another ordinary human, like any of them." His words made the Bijuu snort in annoyance. "You're so strange. Why do you stay here? It's obvious that nobody wants you in this place. You're just locking yourself away from the great opportunities that await you. Let's get out of this dump and look for some fun elsewhere. Nobody here cares about you," were the acerbic words of the red-haired fox, who looked intensely at the shinobi. They locked eyes, red and blue met. More talkative than usual. "You're right, no one wants me here, but that doesn't mean I care," thinking that in his mind made the silhouette of the red-haired girl disappear. He sighed and was about to continue with his lunch, but he was interrupted by someone standing in front of the table where he was seated. Curiously, the shinobi looked at Momo Yaoyorozu. "Good morning, Uzumaki-san. I hope you don't mind if I sit with you." Uzumaki noticed that the girl came from high society. It was easy to tell from her way of speaking, her upright posture, and the forced smile on her face. "It's a free country, Momo-san," was the simple response from the shinobi, who took the remaining apple from his tray. Upon his acceptance, the dark-haired teenager sat down. "Thank you," the girl said with a forced smile, expressing gratitude for the blonde's dry words. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. With an analytical look, the teenager noticed that her classmate had bandages on his wrists and parts of his hands. Could it be from suicide attempts? The girl wondered, looking at the shinobi's hands for a moment. But he quickly noticed her gaze. "Curious?" the Uzumaki asked with a smile, causing the girl to avert her gaze. He raised his right arm and removed the bandages to reveal his injured arm, showing some bruises and cuts that made the dark-haired girl gasp in surprise and disbelief. "Street fights?" the girl asked. It wouldn't be the first to engage in illegal fights using their quirks. With caution, she watched as the blonde calmly and gently reapplied the bandages. No, I'm just under strict training," he responded simply to the girl's theories or accusations. She looked relieved. "Well, that's a relief since I'd be obligated to report it to the authorities if it were true. Fighting with our quirks outside of designated areas is against the Academy's rules, and it could even get you expelled," Momo explained seriously, hoping that her words would be taken seriously by the blonde in front of her. But he only smiled mockingly. "Expel me? That's what everyone here would love," he said, looking around, and those who were watching quickly averted their gaze. "They're not good at speaking softly." He pointed to the table where the other students of Class 1A were, and they tensed knowing they had been overheard. Well, I'm sorry that we talked about you behind your back. But rest assured we don't want you to get expelled or anything like that," the girl assured, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. "You don't need to lie. I know I'm not the nicest guy in the world. To be honest, my younger sister is the cheerful one who always makes friends with her silly and innocent way of being. I wish I could be more like her," he sighed, stood up from his seat, and continued, "Even if you all fear or even hate me, I can only say that I consider you my comrades while being in your group. I know all of you are good people, so I promise I'll give my life to protect you." With those words, he left the table. Momo and the rest of Class 1A looked confused by the last thing he said. Despite how they had ignored and treated him, he considered them his comrades, part of a group. Before anyone could say anything more, the loud bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. With different thoughts in their minds, each of the students of Class 1A headed to the locker rooms. In just a few minutes, they would set off on a rescue mission. Aizawa was curious about how all his students were strangely quiet in their seats on the bus that was taking them. It had only been a few minutes since they had left, and few had spoken. It seemed to be related to several who were subtly giving glances to the shinobi sitting at the back along with a quiet Toru. Just a few seats in front of the blonde with a sword was Izuku, who was seated with Asui and Kirishima. The green-haired boy watched with curiosity as Uzumaki sat with his eyes closed, appearing to be asleep. Uzumaki-san, however, he opened his eyes upon hearing Uraka's voice. He looked at the brunette, who was kneeling in her seat and staring directly at him. "Can I ask you a question?" the brunette asked the blonde teenager. Nodding his head, he leaned back in his seat to get a better look at the girl, which made several other students also pay attention to the situation that was unfolding. "You said you would give your life for us. Why?" she asked with curiosity. She was confused. This guy had mocked them on their first day, beat them all, crushed their dreams, and even threatened to kill one of their classmates if they didn't kill her. These constant changes were confusing her too much. "It's part of my code," he replied calmly, looking out the window of the bus in a distracted manner. "Code?" inquired an intrigued Shiori who was sitting in front of Midoriya. To the mixed-haired girl's question, the blonde only took a deep breath and looked at his classmates. "My sensei used to say that the most important thing a person can have is their own code. Our codes are what define us as individuals. Things like not stealing, not lying, not harming loved ones are perhaps some of the codes that you yourselves have to be better people. Each person has their own codes, and that's what makes us different from each other. Our own judgment tells us what we will be at the end of the day, in simple terms, a hero or a villain," he explained in a relaxed manner, leaving the students to ponder his words. Shouta, on the other hand, looked at the boy with suspicion. What he said was his ideal, and he could respect that, but having one's own rules meant that they would often disregard society's rules, And having their own codes was one of the main reasons for the existence of villains. After all, they had their own goals and rules, ignoring and breaking those set by society. Taking a deep breath, the teacher only watched as the vehicle parked. They had arrived. As they got off the bus, they were followed by the teenagers who looked in awe at the large building in front of them. When they entered through the large doors, they were amazed to find that the building was a dome divided into different disaster zones. "Welcome," a man in a strange suit that made him look like an astronaut appeared in front of the group. Naruto lost interest when Midoriya started saying unnecessary things about the hero in charge of the rescue area. He curiously looked around. It seemed strange that the government would be willing to allocate so many billions to build these places. He found such a waste of resources stupid. Nothing guaranteed that some of his classmates would be real heroes just for attending an exclusive academy, but well, it wasn't worth wasting time on those details. Naruto turned to find a concerned Momo just a few steps away from him. "Are you okay?" he asked with a simple response as he saw the group of students still talking with hero number 13, if he remembered correctly. In reality, he wasn't interested. As he walked towards them, he was followed by a curious Momo. The teenager noticed that he still didn't have a costume like the rest of them. "I see you haven't decided on your costume design yet. Or don't you plan to use one?" the girl asked, trying to start a conversation. "I don't care about those things," was the short reply from the boy who was wearing the same clothes as when he first faced them, only this time, he had a dark hoodie on with his short sword strapped to his back. "Oh." The girl felt uncomfortable and simply nodded her head. She couldn't say that the topic of costumes was relevant or positive, as her own outfit made her uncomfortable for exposing so much skin, making her feel like a stripper. "Do you think we look ridiculous in these outfits?" she asked with a blush of embarrassment. "Yes, but it seems these outfits they're wearing are helpful for you," he said, giving an analytical look to the dark-haired girl next to him, who felt uneasy being stared at. "I've noticed that your quirk involves creating non-living things through your body fat, an incredibly challenging ability, in my opinion." "Huh?" The teenager was confused by the change of topic. At first, she thought he was just staring at her because of her revealing attire, but it seemed he wasn't even fazed by that. "Don't get me wrong, your quirk is interesting. It not only allows you to create objects but also offers a wide range of options. I heard you're the top student in the class academically, so your intellect must be respected. I wouldn't be surprised if, with your intelligence and ability, you could become someone great in the future," he said, continuing on his way and leaving the girl still processing what she had heard. Thanks," she sincerely thanked him as she walked quickly to catch up with him. It was nice to be recognized for her abilities and intellect. Usually, the attention of the guys she knew focused on her appearance or her high-class status. As she was about to speak again, she saw him, along with the other students and teachers, stop when a strange purple mist formed in the center of the dome. From the mist, a kind of portal formed, and a hand emerged. Everyone watched as the head of a man with white hair, whose face was covered by one hand and another hand on different parts of his body, appeared from the portal. The man was dressed in dark attire, and the blond boy watched him closely. "Everyone, gather in one place and don't move," the class teacher suddenly ordered, surprising the students who looked at their teacher alarmed. "Number 13, protect the students," the dark-haired man shouted at the top of his lungs as he took a step forward. "What is that? Is it like the entrance exam?" Kirishima asked. "Don't move. They are." The dark-haired man climbed onto the railing. "Villains." Midoriya's shout made it clear when the purple shadow spread further, revealing dozens of different people passing through the portal, whether women or men with various physical characteristics, all seemed eager to start what they believed would be a massacre. "Eraserhead and number 13, a voice came from the hole, like a kind of cloud from which all these villains emerged. According to the information we obtained yesterday, Mr. All Might was supposed to be here. However, the spectral being with only red eyes spoke. Where is he? After going through so much trouble. And bringing many of us here. You can't tell me. That All Might, the symbol of peace, isn't here." The one who seemed to be the leader, an adolescent nearing adulthood, dressed in dark attire with several hands in different parts of his body, and with one hand covering his face in an extreme manner, said. "I wonder if he'll show up if we kill all these kids," he declared, sending a chill through everyone, except Naruto, who was standing with his arms crossed, watching the situation with a relaxed expression. Stepping forward, Aizawa unleashed the bindings around his neck, and with a gleam in his red eyes, he looked at his students. "You stay with number 13 and don't move," he said, then, without further ado, he jumped, ignoring the worried cries of the teenagers who saw him act, and landed near the group. The hero ran towards the group of villains, and without hesitation, they charged at him. "You think you can attack all of us alone?" yelled a man who had triggers on the tips of his fingers. However, he was left astonished when his quirk didn't work, just like several others. Before he could comprehend what had happened, he was knocked out by a kick to his face. "We must help him," Izuku shouted and was about to jump over the railing. However, he was grabbed by his costume and moved aside. Confused, he saw Naruto walking to the edge of the railing with a serious expression. "You heard the old man, stay here. I'll go." Before he could finish his sentence, he took his sword and threw it behind him. Several students were frightened when the sword passed between them and reached behind, right where a strange purple mist began to form. "Good reflexes, kid." Kurogiri showed no signs of being affected when the sword passed through his head, but he was surprised when the boy reappeared behind him with the sword in hand. "He's fast." His entire body was divided into several cuts, grazing his metallic cylinder. "I don't remember anyone with his characteristics on our list of students. He must have been added recently. He's dangerous." With these thoughts, he saw the shinobi stepping back to get a closer look at him. The villain had no time to think as he was attacked by Kirishima and Bakugo. The useless Uzumaki isn't the only one who can attack. The explosive teenager extended his arm to release an explosion along with the redhead who activated his quirk in his arms. However, before anyone could reach the mist-like being, they were absorbed by a portal, and more portals opened, carrying several people away. Number 13 was injured trying to absorb one of the portals. "Oh no." Ochako watched as Deku and Asui were taken by a portal. Stepping back, she saw a portal open in front of her. But before she could be taken, her waist was wrapped in a thin steel thread that pulled her away from the portals. She was surprised to see that she was taken along with Momo, Toru, Kaminyari, Ashido, Kyoka, and Ida. They were all pulled away by Uzumaki, who had wire in his hands and mouth. "You saved us." The girl exclaimed happily, standing up along with her friends. "Ida, you have to go and get help. The rest of you take care of number 13 and get out of here." The commanding voice surprised the students who remained on the entrance platform. As the Uzumaki saw with annoyance how the mist villain disappeared through another portal, he turned and saw that everyone was still behind him. "What did I tell you? Get out." Ida was the first to snap out of his paralysis and ran for the door at full speed, only to have it slam shut. "One got away," murmured an impassive Shigaraki, who, behind his hand on his face, frowned. Turning to his left, he saw a man with a screen on his left arm and nodded, indicating that he had successfully hacked into the building and also blocked the signal so that no one could call for help. They would only be allowed to call the heroes after everyone was dead. Shifting his focus to Aizawa, he saw that he was still battling his henchmen. Ah! Another of the villain's pawns fell before a punch from Eraserhead, who was already exhausted and fatigued from constantly using his quirk. Taking a deep breath, he was about to continue, but he was diverted by a surprise blow from a man over 2 meters tall with a massive build. He carried a large hammer and was about to use it to crush the hero. But he didn't get the chance, as a sword blade pierced his right shoulder. Before he could even scream in pain, he was grabbed by the neck and slammed into the ground, embedded by the brute force of his attacker, who turned out to be Naruto. With a swift motion, Naruto punched his sword into the man's body, and as he turned, the shinobi met the incredulous gazes of the villains and the serious look of Aizawa, who slowly rose to his feet. In the hero's gaze, the shinobi snorted, "I didn't kill him, just made sure he won't get up for a while," he said with indifference as he looked around. There were still several people to deal with. He didn't have time for this. He didn't want to reveal anything in front of so many people. Slowly, he reached for the sword on his back and moved his feet. A series of events unfolded. Eraserhead had fought alongside All Might before, but few people could move so quickly that the human eye couldn't follow. Now he saw someone who could be compared to the number one hero. Everything happened in a matter of seconds, and over 45 people who dared to invade this place ended up on the ground with non-lethal sword cuts and punches that left them unconscious. Naruto, among the fallen villains, only moved his sword, causing blood to splatter on the ground. Turning around, he faced the last 3 villains, the Misty Man, the muscle-bound figure with his exposed brain, and the guy with his hands on his face. "Is that all you could manage? How mediocre." He sheathed his sword and seriously considered going to save the other kids who had been taken to different parts of the area. "Wow! It's incredible." At the top of the entrance platform, the students who were still together watched in admiration and fear as so many people were taken down in just a few seconds. "He's in a whole different league. Way superior to any of us," Kaminyari admitted aloud, his voice trembling in fear. How was it possible for a human to be so fast? His thoughts were shared by the others, who continued to keep their distance for their own safety. Could his quirk be like Midoriya-san's? Is he capable of suddenly boosting his body and senses? Momo thought anxiously, not missing any detail of what she was witnessing. Returning to Shigaraki, he scratched his neck in annoyance as he watched his pawns being defeated in such a humiliating way. He glared with irritation at the blonde. How arrogant. Nomu, the giant at his side, immediately tensed at the teenager's voice. The latter raised his hand to point at the shinobi, who still stood with his arms crossed. Kill him. With that simple command, the enormous being of 3 meters growled and got on all fours, fixing its gaze on its target and preparing to strike. Seeing his overly muscular body and short legs, he must be slow, won't be a problem. Naruto was about to reach for his sword when he saw in an instant a giant fist embedded in his face. The ground beneath him cracked as the Nomu rushed at him at incredible speed and smashed its right fist into his face, sending the shinobi flying several meters to crash into a concrete wall. What the hell? The shocked shinobi thought as he felt his back nearly break upon impact. Choking back the scream of pain, he tried to regain his composure. But he didn't even get to see the black blur that came crashing into him, slamming him against the concrete wall once again, burying him even deeper under the rubble that fell upon him. Everyone was left in awe as the creature smashed the Uzumaki against a 50 square meter wall of pure concrete, almost toppling the same wall. Tomura only watched with satisfaction as the Nomu emerged from the wall to let the debris fall on the arrogant blonde, who was now buried under tons of concrete. A deathly silence fell over the place, with only the heavy footsteps of the enormous dark being, which had come to stand next to its leader, breaking the silence. It was too much for him. Now. Eraserhead, any last words? He spoke with malice, raising his hand and pointing at the dark-haired hero, who felt helpless after witnessing one of his students possibly being killed. Now, he saw the one who had defeated Naruto coming for him. Raising his arms to defend himself, he was brutally attacked. Naruto. Momo was the first to snap out of the shock. Her classmate had just been crushed by tons of rubble. With her mind working at full speed, she took the terrified Uraka's hand and pulled her along. Listen, we have to get Naruto-san out from under the debris. I know you're terrified, but only you can make those tons of concrete float. Without stopping, they descended the left side of the platform, ignoring the worried screams of their classmates who remained with number 13. Yes. We have to help him. Coming out of her shock, Ochako realized they needed to save their classmate. Following the black-haired girl, they had to watch their teacher being mercilessly beaten by the monstrous creature. With a sense of helplessness, both girls continued running toward their goal. Passing by an artificial pond, they encountered Izuku, Mineta, and Asui, who were heading in the opposite direction. Where are you going? The exit is that way, yelled the small, bald-haired boy in panic, who just wanted to go home. We have to go for Naruto. He's over there. The class president shouted, pointing in the distance. Both Deku and the frog girl saw this and knew that the loud crash they had heard just seconds ago was the blow that defeated their classmate. Uzumaki-san. Was he defeated? Asked the green-haired teenager in amazement, seeing their teacher now under the Nomu, being tortured as his arms were broken. Angrily, the green-haired boy averted his gaze. He thought about going to help, but Aizawa's look told them to run. They couldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. Let's go get him and find help. The students looked at each other and nodded in agreement as they headed to retrieve their fallen classmate. However, their path was interrupted by a portal that opened in front of them. A hand emerged from the portal, heading straight for Deku's face. The teenager watched in shock as Shigaraki emerged from the portal with his mist companion, which reformed. Luckily for Deku, a long tongue wrapped around his waist and pulled him away from the leader of the villains. The group of heroes was now facing Kurogiri and Tomura. Planning to go somewhere? The dark-clad teenager asked mockingly, smiling as he saw where the students were headed. He made a hand gesture, and instantly, the Nomu arrived, dragging Aizawa's motionless body. The teacher was roughly thrown at the student's feet, and they could see that he was out of commission and wouldn't last much longer due to his injuries. Eraserhead remained silent, his gaze lost, showing that he was no longer in the fight, and with his injuries, it wouldn't be long before his condition became critical. Seeing the situation, Deku positioned himself in front of the girls and their fallen teacher. Girls! Get sensei out of here. With trembling legs and teary eyes, the teenager prepared for battle. I'll give you the time to escape. It's the only thing I can do until All Might arrives. His entire body was enveloped in green lightning, and his skin turned orange with red lines. He was going to deliver a powerful blow. If he used his legs to jump and strike, it would cause enough damage and buy time for his friends to escape. Even though he knew he might not be able to move afterward and would be vulnerable, it was the only option he had now. Naturally, his friends refused such an act, except for Mineta, who had already fled to the exit. A true hero, Shigaraki said with annoyance, looking at the green-haired teenager. I'll enjoy seeing All Might's rage when he sees only a pile of bodies that were once his students. Kill them all, Nomu. Everyone came to a halt when the dark creature ran toward the group of students. Izuku was ready to sacrifice himself for his friends and join the attack. However, the Nomu never got to touch the teenagers, as it was sent flying by a blow to its chin, causing it to fall heavily behind its leader. Naruto, the blonde Uzumaki, landed between the villains and the young heroes. He was injured, with his torn and blood-stained hoodie, and had wounds in various areas of his body. The most prominent was a cut on his head that caused blood to run down his forehead. With a serious look, the shinobi revealed that his bandages had been removed, showing his headband and his shining Sharingan, with Tomoe spinning threateningly. I won't allow my comrades to be killed. With his right hand at his back, he unsheathed his sword and aimed it at the villains, who didn't expect the Uzumaki to rise after that blow that would have been fatal for anyone else. With his sword raised, the shinobi glared angrily at his enemies. Before reaching them, you'll have to step over my dead body. The games were over, he had played enough with the villains and the heroes. It was time to do things his way. End.